What if the most powerful army in the world began not with strength, but with a fragile dream? In 1776, long before the United States became a global power, the land that would become America was simply a group of 13 scattered colonies living under the rule of the mighty British Empire. The British military dominated the oceans, commanded vast territories, and possessed one of the most disciplined armies the world had ever seen. Against such overwhelming power, the American colonies appeared weak, divided, and unprepared for war. Yet inside the meeting halls of the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, a bold decision was quietly forming. If the colonies truly wanted freedom, they would need an army willing to defend it. From that moment, the foundation of what would become the United States Army began to emerge. But this army did not begin with polished uniforms, powerful weapons, or experienced soldiers. It began with ordinary people. Farmers left their fields. Blacksmiths walked away from their forges. Merchants closed their shops. Young men who had never seen a battlefield stepped forward to fight for a future they could only imagine. But here is the mystery that still fascinates historians today. How could a group of ordinary volunteers challenge the most powerful empire on Earth? The answer began with leadership. The Continental Congress selected a commander whose calm presence and determination would become legendary: George Washington. Washington understood immediately that the army he had been given was fragile. Supplies were scarce. Many soldiers lacked uniforms. Some carried hunting rifles from their homes instead of proper military weapons. Yet Washington believed that the true strength of the army would not come from equipment. It would come from unity, discipline, and belief in a shared cause. Imagine standing on a battlefield knowing your enemy is stronger, richer, and better trained. Would you still fight? For the soldiers of the early American army, that question became a daily reality. The British forces marched in organized formations and used tactics refined through decades of warfare. In contrast, the colonial army often struggled with coordination and training. Early battles were chaotic and unpredictable, and sometimes the colonial forces suffered painful setbacks. But something unexpected began to happen among the soldiers. Each defeat seemed to strengthen their determination rather than break their spirit. They were not simply fighting for land. They were fighting for the revolutionary idea that people could govern themselves without a king. As the war continued, the soldiers began transforming from scattered volunteers into a united force. They trained together, marched together, and slowly developed the discipline needed to stand against a professional army. Then came the winter that nearly ended everything. The army retreated to Valley Forge, where freezing winds, hunger, and disease threatened to destroy the revolution entirely. Snow covered the ground for miles, and food supplies became dangerously low. Many soldiers lacked boots and proper clothing, forcing them to march barefoot across frozen terrain. Blood sometimes marked their footsteps in the snow. To outside observers, it seemed inevitable that the rebellion would collapse during that brutal winter. But what happened at Valley Forge would change the destiny of the United States forever. Instead of falling apart, the army began to transform. Under Washington's leadership, discipline grew stronger, training improved, and unity spread among the soldiers. The hardships they endured together forged bonds that turned scattered militia into a real fighting force. They learned to maneuver as coordinated units, fire more effectively, and maintain order even in the chaos of battle. The suffering at Valley Forge became a powerful symbol of perseverance, proving that the soldiers were willing to endure any hardship for the dream of independence. And that raises another fascinating question. What truly makes an army powerful? Is it superior weapons and resources? Or is it the belief of the people who stand together to defend their freedom? For the early United States Army, that belief became its greatest strength. Across the colonies, ordinary citizens watched the soldiers with growing admiration. These men who had once been farmers, craftsmen, and merchants were now defenders of a new idea called America. Their courage inspired communities and strengthened the determination of the colonies to continue the fight. As the revolution continued, the world began watching the American struggle with curiosity and disbelief. Few expected a small rebellion to survive against the massive British Empire. Yet battle after battle proved that determination could challenge even the greatest power. And perhaps the most incredible part of this story is that it all began with ordinary people who simply refused to give up on a dream. From those fragile beginnings in 1776, the United States Army was born, not as a symbol of conquest, but as a defender of liberty and the belief that a nation built on freedom could survive against impossible odds. But the story of the United States Army didn't end with survival. It was only beginning. As the American Revolution continued, the soldiers who had once been ordinary civilians were transforming into something far greater. The young force that had struggled in its early days was now becoming a disciplined military capable of standing toe-to-toe with the powerful British Empire. Under the leadership of George Washington, the Army began to develop confidence, organization, and a shared identity that united soldiers from all 13 colonies. They were no longer simply Virginians, Pennsylvanians, or New Yorkers. They were becoming Americans. And that raises an extraordinary question. How does a group of volunteers become the foundation of a nation's military legacy? The answer lies in the values that shaped the Army during its earliest days: courage, discipline, sacrifice, and a deep commitment to protecting liberty. These values guided the soldiers through the most difficult moments of the Revolutionary War. Battles were fought across forests, rivers, and small colonial towns, and each victory, no matter how small, strengthened the belief that independence was possible. Communities across the colonies watched the Army's perseverance and began to see these soldiers not only as fighters, but as guardians of a future nation. Imagine fighting for a country that doesn't officially exist yet. Would you still believe victory was possible? For the soldiers of the emerging United States Army, that belief became the heart of their mission. They understood that every sacrifice they made could help shape the future of the United States. Their courage on the battlefield inspired citizens, strengthened alliances, and proved that determination could challenge even the most powerful empire. As the war progressed, the Army continued to grow stronger and more organized. Soldiers who had once struggled with basic training now marched with discipline and confidence. Officers refined strategies. Soldiers adapted to new challenges. And the Army developed a sense of unity that made it far more resilient than anyone had expected. But the real power of the United States Army was never just military strength. It was the spirit behind it. The soldiers believed they were defending something larger than themselves. They were protecting the idea that freedom, self-government, and opportunity could exist for future generations. This belief became the foundation of the Army's identity and shaped its role in American history. As the Revolutionary War moved toward its conclusion, the perseverance of the American forces began to change the way the world viewed the colonies. What had once been dismissed as a small rebellion was now recognized as a determined struggle for independence. International observers began realizing that the dream of a free United States might actually become reality. And perhaps the most remarkable transformation was happening within the Army itself. The same soldiers who had once been inexperienced volunteers were now respected warriors who had endured hardship, faced powerful enemies, and proven their commitment to freedom. Their story became part of the larger story of America, an example of how courage and unity can shape the destiny of a nation. When the war finally ended and the United States secured its independence, the Army that had defended the dream of liberty became a permanent institution dedicated to protecting the country and its people. Over the years that followed, the United States Army would continue evolving, growing stronger and more capable, while remaining connected to the principles that inspired its creation. And that leads to the final mystery of this story. What truly gave birth to the United States Army in 1776? Was it simply a military necessity during a revolution? Or was it the moment when ordinary citizens decided that freedom was worth defending at any cost. The answer lives in the courage of those early soldiers who stood together during the darkest days of the Revolution and refused to abandon their dream. From the snowy hardships of Valley Forge to the growing victories that inspired hope across the colonies, the soldiers proved that belief can be as powerful as any weapon. Today, when people look at the United States Army, they see strength, discipline, and global respect. But behind that strength lies the story of the ordinary Americans who first stepped forward in 1776 to defend a dream. And the question that still echoes through history is this: did those first volunteers realize they were creating one of the most respected military forces in the world, or were they simply following a belief strong enough to change history forever?